Well, welcome to Debbie's Back Porch. So glad to have you with us. Today I'm going to talk about pruning tomatoes. To prune or not to prune? The number one tomato question. This is not going to be so much of a tutorial as more a discussion of philosophy. Tomatoes are my philosophy, by the way, and everybody has a different one, so I'm going to show you mine. Well, this is one of my tomato beds. I didn't plant these all at the same time. They're in all different stages of development. Some of them have already been pruned. Well, they've all been pruned some, but this row has had a second pruning, which I'll show you in a little bit. So every time I think about pruning tomatoes, I think of Mr. Miyagi and the Karate Kid. Like a bonsai plant, you prune it to make it look the way you want it. I like to prune them up from the bottom. I want to make sure that they don't get a lot of splash. And I have to do that 2 or 3 times because as limbs get heavy, they fall down and have to be trimmed off. And my goal in pruning tomatoes is to make them grow up and to keep splash off the bottom and to keep enough trimmed out in the middle so that there's good circulation, so that the rain and the dew will dry pretty quickly and that we don't get blight. But I also don't like a little skinny looking tomato plant that goes up a string and that is suckered heavily. So when I'm pruning, it may or may not have to do with suckers. It has to do with the shape of the tomato, how you can manage it, and how it can be pretty and give you lots of tomato. Let me show you what I mean. This is a big sun gold. It was the first one I planted. You may have seen me plant it. It has been pruned and had some suckers cut off several times, but it's kind of going wild here. And I'm going to look at it and find any limbs that need to be pruned off. And yes, it may be limbs, not just suckers. If I can't make it grow up and give it some support, it's going to go, because the tomatoes will make it heavy and will make it break. And while it's in that process, it may get blight. So I've got strings on these cages, and anything that's hanging down that can't be attached to a string to give it support is going to get cut off. And see, that one I attached. I also don't want to get it too crowded inside, but I don't want it on the ground and I don't want it breaking. Like this one. This one, it has little tomatoes on it. It has little blooms on it, but it's going. Because if I just leave it alone, it's going to break. And you know, I know somebody cringed when I did that. But a tomato plant, an indeterminate tomato plant, and that's really what I'm working with here, it's going to give you somewhere between 12 and 20 pounds of tomatoes. But to get to the 20 side, you're going to have to do some management. Just letting them sprawl is the way to get 12. But keeping them pruned, keeping them healthy, keeping them trimmed and manageable is going to put you closer to the 20. And you know, we all want to get that 20 pounds off our tomato plants. So I'm looking around here. This is my oldest tomato plant. I planted it first. Planted it a week or so before I planted the rest. And I've been getting lots of tomatoes off of this already. These are little sun golds, and they seem to ripen first. But I want to get my 20 pounds. See, there you go. Whoops. And these are just so sweet. You know, I'm kind of ruthless. I don't want the plant to put its energy and the soil to put its nutrients into a limb that's going to break. And I can never get ahead of them, so I'm always ending up trimming off some limbs. And on the back side of this plant, there's some more. But this is a huge plant. If you can see, I will eventually have to get a ladder to get all the tomatoes off of this. And I'm reaching inside to trim that out a little bit too. Not a whole lot, because it has been suckered and trimmed in there for air circulation when it was much smaller. So I just have a little bit to get out. And some of it's suckers, some of it's leaves, anything that looks a little discolored, maybe has a bug bite or two. Even though I have to say, I haven't seen any bug bites on these, and they have not been sprayed with any kind of pesticide. They've just been kind of managed. I'll finish this up. I'm going to trim some off of the back, and then we'll move on to another plant. Okay, this is a much younger tomato plant, and it only had its very first little pruning where I trimmed around the bottom, and you can see that it's grown a lot, and it's hanging down. So we're gonna take this plant and cut it into shape, and I'll sort of show you how I do that at this stage. So I'm going to go back to the Mr. Miyagi story. You just want to look at this and sort of see how you want it to look. So we know we want to trim it up from the bottom, and then we want to trim out some of the clutter in there so that there's good air circulation, and we want to train it upward. And right away, you see some that has to go. The leaves are curling on the bottom. They're touching. Got to get rid of that. Don't want blight. So that limb is going. And you can see we've already got some tomatoes growing down here. So when we're trimming, another thing to consider is we want to leave enough shade so that those don't get sun scald. And you know, while I say I'm ruthless, you want to leave enough foliage so that you have good photosynthesis, enough shade for the tomatoes. Don't cut it all away. And that's the reason I say I don't particularly like the tomatoes that are heavily suckered and grow up a string. I like to have some foliage. I've got to weed while I go too. So this new growth down here that's going to end up on the ground gets cut away and cleaned up. We don't want to leave any of the trash to cause blight. Okay, now I'm going to make you cringe again. You see this? This is a sucker I missed. And I did try to get most of the suckers when this was young. This is a young plant. This is growing off to the side. No way to save it. It's too heavy already. It's got to go. And yes, I know that makes you cringe. And yes, it has some little blooms on it. But it's going anyway. And the plant's going to thank you. Yes, it's pretty big. It's kind of hard to cut. But this is going to break and cause problems, so we're getting rid of it. And I carry my little hula hoe with me. I don't want to make a special trip to come back and get weeds. I want to get them as I'm going and pull that mulch back to prevent more weed growth. And as I'm trimming, I'm pulling these limbs up, trailing them upward. This is something I would trim out for circulation. It's a limb, it's not a sucker, it has no blooms on it, it's going to go, it's not needed for shade, there's plenty in there. At this point we're going to look for suckers too. Now this is what I call a sucker. If you'll see, you've got a main stem and you've got a limb coming off of that, and in the V, that's a sucker. And this is a good one. This one will probably make a whole new plant. I'm dropping these little suckers this size into some water, and I'll show you in another video how you can start new plants from them. I don't take all the suckers, but I take the ones that are gonna change the shape. Should have got some scissors here because I'm training it upward. But you see, that'll make a whole plant. And I'll start these and get a few extra plants for a later planting. So I've got this row done. It's still kind of bushy, but it's been trimmed. I've got it in order, and I'm going to come back and do this. You know, about once a week I'll check. Anything that's hanging down will get clipped off, like you saw me do with the sun gold. But I'm hoping to get 20 pounds of tomatoes off of each one of these. And as I said, this is not a tutorial, this is more a philosophy. Managing your tomatoes doesn't have to be a huge job, but you do have to put some effort into it if you want to get the best out of it. You know, and as I said, everybody has their own theory. This is mine. I believe if you manage your tomatoes so that all the energy and nutrients and water goes into producing tomatoes and not fighting disease, that you have better luck, you have fewer insects, and you have more tomatoes. Thank you for joining us. Hope to see you again tomorrow.